Above the bright lights of San Bernardino, in the forests of the Southern California mountains, lurks the ominous Sasquatch. Sightings have occurred in Big Bear and Lake Arrowhead, leading researchers to conclude that they survive here in the mountains. With miles of undeveloped wilderness, reports and evidence of these creatures persist along the Santa Ana River, both contemporary and historical.
It was just amazing, you know?
Yeah.
Welcome back to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Eli Watson. Now, for the past couple of episodes, I've been discussing Southern California Sasquatch. At this point, this would be the fourth episode of Southern California Sasquatch. If you're not caught up on the other parts, I suggest that you go back and watch those. However, there is something I want to discuss, and that is, I want to do a little bit of a recap about some of these Southern California Sasquatch researchers, both historical and modern day. The reason I want to do this before I get into all the cool Sasquatch sightings is because I believe it's important. It's important to know the history of the area that I'm researching, and it's also important to give these people the recognition that they deserve, because Southern California isn't really discussed in the realm of Sasquatch research, and the researchers here are definitely not as well known as some of the other pioneers in the Pacific Northwest and places like that. So first off, I want to mention someone that I've talked about a lot already, which is an LA County Sheriff named Ken Kuhn, who was one of the first Southern California Sasquatch researchers. Like a lot of people, he got involved in the late 60s after the Patterson-Gimlin film. He did some work in Northern California in the Bluff Creek area, but he started to investigate reports here in Southern California. The most prominent being the Zubies case out of Alpine, California, and that was a big one that I talked about in the previous episode.
If you go back in the books, you can find names of people who are looking into Sasquatch reports. Peter Gattila jumps to mind. Dan Perez has been in the game a long time. He did stuff in the early 80s down there.
Well, the late Bobbie Slate, who wrote a book, co-authored a book called Bigfoot in 1976 with Ellen Berry. She was very active in the 70s. Peter Gattila was very active. Rich Grumley was very active in the high desert area in Lancaster and Palmdale. He was also part of the California Bigfoot organization. Had Rich still been living, that organization could have been really big, if not bigger than the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization.
Matt has done a lot of work down here because he's always been, recent years, decades, he's been based in Southern California. I've done some, both with and without Matt.
Well, there's some pretty famous researchers. Matt Moneymaker would be one, but I don't know him. Daniel Perez has been researching in Southern California since the 70s. One of my friend's dads, named Dennis Rumner, has been researching Southern California a lot. He researched a lot in the 70s and the 80s.
I got into Bigfoot because my friend Tom Muzilla was in this group called the Bigfoot Co-op, which was in Whittier, where Constance Cameron, that was the lady who ran the group. It was about 10 people in the group. I can't even remember their names now because it's been almost 40 years ago. And the only one still around is Daniel Perez. But he left the group within a few months after I joined it, he never gave a good excuse why he did, but he did. It was a very good group. The lady who ran it, Constance Cameron, she had a doctorate in archaeology and anthropology at Cal State Fullerton. That's what. So she was head of their department there. So then to have her as head of our little Bigfoot group was quite impressive. She did a lot of research in it, and she would get sighting reports from all over the place. She had traveled around a lot, even to Russia, and she had doctors over there she knew who had investigated Bigfoot over there and had several sighting reports out of Russia even. You know, forested areas in Russia.
So a lot of the work that these Southern California researchers put in is very prominent and still has ripples on the Bigfoot community today. For example, there were lots of groups forming. We had the Bigfoot Co-op with Constance Cameron. We also had the California Bigfoot Research Organization based out of Palmdale, which was led by Rich Grumley and Floyd Smith. And while those two groups aren't around today, there is another group that was formulated here in Southern California, which was the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the BFRO, which was created by Matt Moneymaker, which is arguably one of the most influential websites in terms of Sasquatch research, the BFRO.net. But I would be remiss if I left out Daniel Perez and his publication of the Bigfoot Times, which I talked about a lot in the first Southern California Sasquatch episode. We also have Bobbie Short, who created the website Bigfoot Encounters, which was an extremely influential website alongside the BFRO for a long time in the early days of the internet.
Bobbie Short. Bobbie. Okay, Bobbie Short. Wow, it's been so long now. She had a website, California Bigfoot Encounters. When I first got into the internet, I mean modem, you know, we're talking early 90s, mid 90s. I remember one night sitting out there in my studio thinking, I wonder what's out there in the search engine. Oh, Bigfoot. So I typed in Bigfoot, just out of curiosity, hit enter. Oh, comes all these websites. Oh, wow. You know, one of them was Bobbie Short's website. And anybody that's been to Bobbie's website knows it's pretty extensive. She spent years building this thing, and the stories and the encounters that are on it, I would spend weeks reading these stories. And that website, her, kind of responsible for like drawing me into this thing. Into this Bigfoot phenomena. Not that I wasn't already into it, but it really made me curious. These stories are just golden, and she has a ton of them. So I began drawing. This is about the time I started drawing Bigfoot. And I contacted Bobbie, and I asked her, hey, these are some drawings I've done. My name is Rob. I live in Alaska. I'm an artist, but here, check these out. I've been drawing these Bigfoots. And she saw these things and went nuts. She was like, oh my gosh. Wow, Rob, you need to keep doing this. You need to keep doing this. And she was very encouraging. And I think I might have asked her, if you know any witnesses, let me know, and I'd like to kind of pick their brain, because I really want to know what they look like. Well, Bobbie emailed me back, and we became pretty good friends after that, and that's how I got to know her. But she really encouraged me to keep drawing the Bigfoot subject and keep researching. She threw me some names. I really created a lot, and I didn't intend it to take off or anything. I was just drawing this stuff, and it would kind of sit on my desk or whatever, so I started scanning these things, sending them to Bobbie. I sent a couple to Jeff Meldrum. I've sent one to Peter Byrne. And back then, this was before everybody was rock stars, and they would email me back. And I remember when Peter Byrne emailed me, I was just shocked. I was shocked. I tried to keep the email for years too, and eventually I lost it. But anyway, Bobbie was always there, and I would throw things to her, you know, what do you know, how about this? What do you know? And she would tell me, oh, I know this and I know that, and she had her theory. She was pretty hard. She was a skeptic. She didn't believe everything, which is good because that's kind of how I am. You got to keep your feet grounded in this subject. But she eventually began writing a book, and it was called The De Facto Sasquatch. And she hired me and a bunch of other artists to do illustrations for this book. And it was basically kind of her website in a book form, being that it was all stories that she's collected, and with illustrations now from artists. So it had the potential to be awesome. It was like, wow, I must have drawn, I want to say like 10 to 15 drawings for this book. I did the cover. It was looking really good. And I was actually working on a last group of drawings. She wanted me to do pencil sketches, and she wanted them to look kind of rough. I have a hard time making rough drawings because I like to draw perfect, detail. So it's kind of, I have to make an effort to draw rough. I sent her those drawings and everything was fine. I think it was Bobbie's daughter that got a hold of me via email and told me that she had passed. And it was quite a shock. I didn't know of any health problems. There was no indication she was just gonna die. But it was very sad. It was very sad. I felt like I lost a friend, but also lost this palette to draw to, this person who would encourage me. And as far as I know, the book has never been published. It is a PDF. There is a PDF file of it on our website. You can look at it. But I sure wish that would have made it to the publisher. I'm sure she does too. I mean, if she was black and white. She didn't like someone or she didn't like something, she would let me know. The one thing she did not like me drawing were conical heads on the Bigfoots. She said the one she saw did not have a conical head, and she would get angry at me. Rob, quit drawing these things with conical heads. So one day I said, okay, Bobbie, why don't you tell me your sighting, since you're the one that says there's no, I'm just drawing what people tell me. She says, oh, I'll think about it. I'm like, Bobbie, you should, come on. I kept encouraging her. Come on, it's not a big deal, jump in. And eventually she did. She gave in, and I began sketching her encounter. And her encounter was pretty simple. She was hiking in, I believe, Northern California with a small group of people, and she had to go potty. She goes off the trail and she's doing her thing, and she said about, it was pretty close, like 20, 30 feet away from her, walks this female Sasquatch. And she said it looked very old, it looked tired, and she said rejected. She said it looked sad. No conical head, just a round head, and she could tell immediately it was a female because it had saggy boobs, much like an old lady would have. And she used that quote too, saggy boobs. And it had a big scar right here on the shoulder. She would emphasize how sad this thing was. It just looked sad. And I would say, what do you mean, sad? I don't know, like it was rejected or kicked out of the clan, or it just looked sad. I'm like, oh, wow. So anyway, I began the drawing process, and it was about halfway through that process, about 90% through that process. She was happy with the sketch. So okay, she said, that's good, that's looking like what I saw. So I began the details, start coloring, adding color. That's when she died. So Bobbie never saw the colored version of that. She only saw the black and white sketch. And I finished it, and it was really weird because I felt like I had nobody to send it to. So it sat on my hard drive. For a long time. It's out there now. I've published it on my Facebook page before, but I don't know if anybody really puts two and two together. Because Bobbie, apparently she wouldn't open up to her story often. I don't know. She thanked me one time. I said, what for? She says, for letting me tell my story. I said, I didn't do anything. I just wanted to know what you saw so I could draw it and see what it looks like. And anyway, it was a great experience with her. Really sad that she left. Really sad. But it is what it is. She's kind of a legend in my mind anyway.
Not everyone knows who Bobbie Short was, and not everyone got the chance to have a relationship with Bobbie Short. But people certainly know her website, and I have certainly used her website a lot in the making of this series. In fact, people were using Bobbie Short's website in some instances more than the BFRO. Like, for example, Todd Hale of the Olympic Project, who submitted his sighting to BigfootEncounters.com. I talk about this a lot in the very first SoCal episode, but Todd Hale had a sighting of a Sasquatch in Big Bear when he was a kid. And it was because he submitted his report to Bigfoot Encounters that he got on Daniel Perez's radar. However, unbeknownst to Daniel at the time, he and Todd had a mutual connection in Dennis Rumner. It was from Todd Hale that I found out about Dennis Rumner. Dennis Rumner was Todd's friend's father, who happened to be into Sasquatch research. And Todd told me about something really crazy with Dennis Rumner. One of the most interesting reports out of Southern California that I know about. One of the most insane pieces of evidence that I can think of in terms of Sasquatch research comes from here in Southern California, and Dennis Rumner is right at the heart of that story. But before I get into that, I want to discuss a little bit about geography, mainly the Santa Ana River. So, just outside the major cities of Los Angeles and San Bernardino, we have the San Gabriels and the San Bernardino Mountains. Now, in the San Bernardino Mountains, which I'm focusing on for this episode, there is the tallest mountain in Southern California, which is San Gorgonio, which is a little over 11,000 feet tall. Flowing from San Gorgonio is the Santa Ana River, which is the largest river in Southern California. Rather, I should say it is the largest river that is solely contained within Southern California. It's about 96 miles long, and it flows down from San Gorgonio, cuts across San Bernardino and Riverside County, and then ends up flowing out into the Pacific Ocean. Now, as we'll see, there are a lot of sightings along the Santa Ana River. Not so much anymore because of development, but in the past, definitely.
I used to know a lot more about California. The Santa Ana River, it starts up at the base of Big Bear, goes all the way to Newport Beach. And there were sightings in Yorba Linda that I know of on that river. And you think of Yorba Linda now, you picture the 91 freeway and just urban sprawl, but it didn't used to be like that. That used to be a canyon with a river, and it was pretty wild. You know where the dam is right there with the 1776 on it on the 91 freeway coming into Corona? That whole area is like a preserve, and I've heard some stuff out of there too in the 70s and 80s. There's no development down, there's no people. And if these things are traveling the rivers or the creeks and the valleys, that's how they're getting down there. They're not gonna be up where the houses are. So there's my friend's dad investigated a case in Buena Park in the riverbed. That riverbed, Santa Ana River. And a homeless guy and some teenage kids saw this thing walking down the river. It was in the newspaper and everything. And I don't know if you're gonna put that in there because I have no way to verify it. I can only report on what I've seen about it, and I still question it to this day. I'm like, there's major development down there, but it's really not that far from Yorba Linda, mileage-wise. And with the reports coming out of Yorba Linda and that riverbed area, that Santa Ana River, that's only another like 10 miles. That thing could get down there in one night if it wanted to.
I was at work and I got a call from my friend, Tom Zilla. There was a sighting of Bigfoot in Buena Park. And I'm going, no. You know, and he says, yes, by this stream that runs down not far from Beach Boulevard there, not far from Knott's Berry Farm. And I thought, really? He says, yeah, let's go. So I left work and picked him up, and we drove to the site, and there was several people there. The police were there interviewing these kids who said they had the sighting, these young boys. And I mean, there was this one boy there was talking to him, and he was just scared. You know, it was like, hey, he's not making anything up, man. He saw something that scared the daylights out of him. They said they saw this big creature. They were up on the side of the stream bed, and this big creature went walking by them down the stream, went past them about 100 yards, and then ducked down and went into that tunnel where we found the handprints. They never saw it come out. They were there the whole time. We started looking around in the stream bed. We didn't find any prints, but there was a lot of water there. If you put a footprint down, it kind of washed it away pretty quick. We went down to where the kids said this thing ducked into this tunnel. I took pictures of it. I showed you my pictures. We ducked inside that tunnel. We just went in a few feet, and on the right-hand side, that's when we started finding these handprints, which were basically the thumb and first 3 fingers. And they were huge, as you can see from the cast I made. They just went back into the tunnel. My friend went in, Tom, quite a ways, till I yelled at him to come back out of there because I didn't want him to get messed up from no air. And anyhow, we made the cast, and several newspaper reporters showed up. And this one lady, she came in there and watched us do the cast and photographed it and all that, you know, and took pictures of both of us and everything. We found out that as well as the four boys who were standing up on the side of the creek when this thing walked by, that the school, there was a girls' school there, Catholic girls' school, and that several girls standing up on the creek in the schoolyard had also seen it. So there were almost 10 kids who had seen this creature walk by and duck into this tunnel. So nobody was making that up. It was just amazing, you know.
They called it Buena Park, where there was a sighting in that area near a school and a flood channel. That was interesting. I also investigated simultaneously, and I'm not sure if I met him there or found out about him there, but it seemed to me that perhaps the eyewitnesses, some of the students who claimed to have seen the thing or whatever, that possibly it was just a transient, a hobo, a person. But Dennis felt otherwise, and there was, I guess, a flood channel that teed off from the main riverbed where I guess a handprint was recovered and a plaster of Paris casting was made. And he seemed to be pretty convinced that it may have been a Bigfoot that did that. But me, not so much.
Because of what we found there and the track we cast, winding up in several newspapers and everything, about 2 weeks after that, I got a phone call, and it was a policeman. He was parked farther down that stream, several miles. He heard this bang. He was just parked, sitting in his patrol car. And he was up on the side of the hill, and there was a bigger river that ran by there. And he looked down the side of the hill, and he saw this Bigfoot creature standing with a railroad tie and bashing into a tunnel similar to the one we had looked at, only this one had been sealed up by bricks, and it was bashing open the bricks. And he said he saw it doing that, did it several times, and looked up and saw him, threw down the tie and walked away. And he said he was too scared to go down there for a long time, you know, but then he finally walked down and looked at it. And then he had heard about my sighting and everything since I was in the papers. So he called me up, got my phone number and called me and took me to that site, which I photographed and everything and showed you the pictures of. Yeah, that was amazing, but I don't know if it was the exact same creature or not, but it was certainly on the same stream or where the original sighting took place. Yeah.
Now, if we're following the Santa Ana River back towards the mountains, we're gonna eventually reach a town or city called Norco.
Well, there was a newspaper article about me and my work in the Riverside Press Enterprise. And as a result, a gentleman that lived on the south side of the 210 freeway in Norco called me up, and myself and I think a fellow investigator by the name of David Murphy, we went up to see him, and he lived in Norco. And he talked about when he was a teenager, I think he said something to the fact that they would take his mom's car and go out drinking in the lemon fields that were on the south side of the San Gabriel's, the San Bernardino Mountains before the 210 freeway was built, because I think he was living up in that area. And they would hear something, I guess as he explained it, something climbing over a chain link fence coming down a canal where the water came down and going into the lemon orchards. I guess there were lemon orchards up there at the time. And I guess he had multiple sightings up there and as a teenager. And again, these were just a group of teenagers in high school that were just going out having a drink. You know, at that point in time, that's what a lot of people do.
Continuing our trend of following the river, we cut close to a town called Fontana, which in my first SoCal episode, I discussed the Fontana Speedway monster, which involved a bunch of people witnessing and encountering a Sasquatch or a Sasquatch-like creature at the Lytle Creek washout, right there at the base of the San Gabriel Mountains. That story is pretty wild, and I highly recommend going back and watching the first SoCal Sasquatch episode if you haven't yet, to learn more about that particular story. However, as we're following the river back up into the mountains, we eventually get to the town of Big Bear. I say town, but it's actually an unincorporated community up in the San Bernardino Mountains. Big Bear is where Todd Hale had his sighting when he was a child. And Todd's sighting is certainly not the only sighting I've heard of in Big Bear. Going back as far as I can find, August of 1963. A young man, he was probably a teenager at the time, was with his family when they rented a cabin up in Big Bear for about a week. They had went to the movie theaters up there, watched a movie, went back to the cabin, and he realized he had left his wallet at the movie theater. His family refused to give him a ride back to the movie theater, so he was like, well, I need my wallet, so I'm gonna walk down anyways. He walks down from where the cabin is, back into town, gets his wallet, starts walking back. At this point, it is now dark. So he's walking uphill, and he's on one of those mountainous roads where it's cut into the side of the mountain, so it's steep on the right side, steep on the left side, going downwards. And he hears something down off towards his left, and it starts coming towards him, and it's breaking branches, and it's walking straight up the steep slope. He makes this point in his report that it would be difficult for a person to do that without slipping and falling, something I can personally attest to, because the steepness of those inclines up in Big Bear are really, really steep. So for anything to be walking up them is pretty strange. He doesn't know what it is, so he decides to just start throwing rocks at this thing, which I'm not sure why you would do that with any wild animal, but that's what he did. He threw rocks at it, and him throwing rocks seemed to piss this thing off. So it starts moving faster, and it starts moving aggressively. And he realizes that he's out here alone. Even though he's along the road, there's no cars nearby. This thing is approaching him fast, He reports that he felt like he was going to die. Just at that moment, a car swings around the bend and stops just before hitting him. And it turns out that it's his mom who's coming to pick him up. I guess she felt bad about making him go walk down to the movie theater to get his own wallet and was coming to pick him up. But her timing was very fortunate because he didn't know what was going to happen to him. He hops in the car and he doesn't say anything about what happened to him. He was so shaken up by what had happened, he didn't even really know how to describe it. That's that story. Fast forward about 13 years and we get to June 1976. This is reported by a man who was around 12 years old at the time, and his family had rented a cabin up at Big Bear for the weekend. He said that it looked like an older cabin. The toilet didn't flush, and instead of peeing in the toilet that didn't flush, he decided he would go outside. So he did, and he turned on the kitchen light and left the door cracked so that there would be a little bit of light on the outside. And he walks a little bit away towards the tree line to take a leak. And that's when he said he felt afraid. He looks over to his right, and about 20 feet away is this thing staring at him through the bushes. It's parting the bushes with his hands and staring at him. He estimates the creature was about 8 feet tall, maybe about 500 pounds, and he said the thing that really stuck out to him the most was how big and broad the chest was. He said this thing looked super powerful. He also described the face as being flat with ape-like features. He stares at this thing for maybe 15 to 20 seconds, and they're both staring at each other. This thing does not move, and he just books it running back into the house. He busts through the screen door, breaking it in the process, waking people up in the house. His dad, his mom come out, they're like, "What's wrong?" He's crying, he's trying to explain what he saw. His dad's like, "Well, it was probably a bear," and he's like, "It wasn't a bear because bears don't have hands." His dad goes out and looks around. There's nothing. The next day, he points out to where he saw this thing. There's no evidence that anything was there at all, and his dad chalks it up to it being a bear. And in the investigation that was conducted by the BFRO, he says that he struggled with that for a long time because he was looking for someone to take him seriously, which just goes to show, I mean, the whole topic of Sasquatch research or people taking these reports seriously is so new that people 50 years ago felt like they couldn't report these things because people like his father would just be like, "Oh, you just saw a bear," and leave it at that, even though he knew what he saw was not a bear. The other aspect of that story that really interests me is that before he saw anything, he reported that he felt scared. And there's this theory that Sasquatch has the ability to use infrasound. Predators like tigers use infrasound to paralyze their prey momentarily before they attack. I'm not saying that a Sasquatch will use infrasound for that reason, because infrasound can cause all sorts of effects, like fear, temporary paralyzation, and becoming sick to the stomach. I know what it's like to feel like you're being watched in the woods, and I feel like what people are describing when they say they suddenly feel afraid, or they suddenly feel like they need to get out of there, I feel like is more than just being watched in the woods. I feel like it's more than just this uncanny valley, almost extrasensory perception that we have. In my opinion, it's a response that our bodies are having to infrasound, because infrasound isn't an actual sound, it's a vibration that we feel in our bodies on a biological level. And it causes these irrational feelings. So for that reason, I find that report highly fascinating. As for what it all means or what that Sasquatch's intentions were, I can't say. Moving on to a different report. Going down the hill from Big Bear a little bit, we enter the Barton Flats Campground, which is really it's in the bottom of this valley. It's super remote. In October of 1993, a man and his friends went camping. I think it was a group of about 3 people. And He was staying in his van, and his other two friends were staying in a tent. So it's about the middle of the night, and he's woken up because his van is rocking wildly back and forth. And he yells out, "Hey!" And suddenly it stops. But as he yelled, he woke up his friends, who he realizes now are in their tent. And they're like, "What's wrong?" He doesn't respond. He just looks out the camper window. And what he sees is this man-like figure, covered in hair, walking away from the van and into the woods without the use of a light. He hops out of the van and he notices this horrible stench. Him and his friends are freaked. They start a fire and they start talking, and he is double checking that they're not the ones who shook the van. And they were like, "No, we thought you were messing with us," because apparently before that happened, something was throwing pebbles at the tent, and then something came close and brushed the side of the tent. That's interesting to me because I've heard lots of reports out of Colorado and other places in the country where these creatures will come close to tents and almost be fascinated by them. The best theory that I have heard as to why a Sasquatch might be interested in a tent, or interested in a vehicle for that matter, is because they're shiny. When you think about it, nothing in nature is truly shiny, except for maybe the reflection of water. Shiny things are typically man-made. Think about glass, you think about plastic, you think about fiberglass. These things are unnatural, and therefore they might be interesting to Sasquatch. It might just be this shiny object and they want to go touch it and figure out what it is. If these things are apes, they're curious like apes. And if there's something weird and shiny in their vicinity, they might want to go and touch it and figure out what it is. The final report out of Big Bear that I have comes from August of 2008. It is a mother and daughter who were staying in a cabin up at Big Bear, and they were awoken by this yell that happened around 2:30 in the morning. And it set off all the dogs in the neighborhood, and it yelled 3 times. And it really freaked the daughter out enough to go outside and try to see what was going on. And apparently it woke up the neighbors as well. But the interesting thing that she saw was that there were coyotes running through her backyard. Coyotes with their ears tucked back and their tails between their legs because they were scared of something. And it certainly didn't sound like anything that she had heard in this area before. What's interesting is that she was on the BFRO website and came across a sound that sounded a lot like what she had heard, and I'm going to play that here now. That report was followed up by Matt Moneymaker, who felt like it was legitimate. I find it fascinating, though, the number of summer sightings around Big Bear. Now, for this episode, me and my brother actually went camping near Big Bear, but before I get into that, I want to discuss some other sightings in other locations in the San Bernardino Mountains to better establish a context and a framework for why we chose the spot that we chose. So one location that I found out from Matt Moneymaker and from Cliff was a location called Deep Creek.
Deep Creek, one of the more interesting places. It's the creek that runs through the mountains just kind of behind Lake Arrowhead with its headwaters up by Big Bear. And when we did a town hall meeting up in the area, we had a few people come in who didn't want to be on camera, who talked about either seeing them near Deep Creek or finding tracks. Why would Deep Creek? Well, the Pacific Crest Trail runs along Deep Creek for many miles. And the Bigfoot stuff either happened in that section or in the headwaters above it. So yeah, Deep Creek is, I think, like various other areas, is a travel route for Sasquatches coming from the Sierras trying to get down to, like, say, the San Jacintos or Anza Borrego Mountains, or, you know, or further in San Diego County, like near the Highway 8.
Now, in the summer of 2009, a group of friends was out hiking around near Deep Creek, and they all spotted what they thought was a man-like or Sasquatch standing on top of a boulder, and they reported about a mile away. He snapped photographs with it with his cell phone, but because of how far it is, it's super pixelated, and you can't really make it out. But I do find that fascinating because if it was standing out in the open like that, it was probably trying to figure out or get a sense of the terrain in the area and figure out where water might be. Which, speaking of water, that's the other component. Creeks here in Southern California tend to dry up pretty fast. However, there are lots of lakes up in the San Bernardino Mountains. Obviously, we have Big Bear Lake, which is probably the biggest lake up there. We also have Lake Arrowhead, which is the lake closest to Deep Creek. We also have Lake Gregory, which is a lot smaller, but I think it's worth mentioning. And then we also have Lake Silverwood, which, interestingly enough, another sighting takes place at. This is by far the most recent report from that area, which is August of 2014. A man and his family decide to go fishing at Silverwood Lake, and he sets up several poles, hoping to catch something. And he is walking between some poles, checking on them, and as he's walking along, he hears something off to his left. And about 30 feet away, he sees this ape-like creature running. He saw its arms swinging as it ran, and it freaked him out. One, because it was huge and covered with hair. Two, it was running like a man. And three, because of how fast it was actually moving. Eventually that thing, it ran into the woods and gone from his eyesight. And he was freaked out. He's there with his family. It freaked out his kids, who also saw it. And I mean, the dude wasn't a Sasquatch researcher. He wasn't gonna go run in the woods after it. So I think he can be forgiven for that much. But the interesting thing about Silverwood Lake is that it's dipping down into the desert. Silverwood Lake is getting into the Mojave Desert, which I've also covered a lot in the second episode of my SoCal series. There are lots of reports out of the Mojave Desert, and this could be a gateway. This location could be like the last stop for water before they try to cross the Mojave. Or, as was pointed out by Matt Moneymaker, who visited the location, the sighting occurred very, very close to the Pacific Crest Trail. The Pacific Crest Trail, or the PCT, is a long-distance hiking trail that stretches from the US-Mexico border all the way up to the US-Canada border, and it cuts through the mountains along the way. That's all the Southern California mountains, including the San Bernardinos, the San Gabriels, then into the Sierras, then into the Cascades up further north. And it is Moneymaker's supposition, now my own, after examining the different sightings, that these creatures might actually follow the PCT. Not because that they're long-distance hikers, although the evidence suggests that they might be, but because the PCT is actually the path of least resistance. It's the most trodden path. It connects every single mountain range from Southern California all the way up to the northernmost tip of Washington State. They could essentially travel this thing like a highway, and it cuts right through Big Bear, it cuts right through Arrowhead, so the sightings are starting to line up. It seems that all these Sasquatch reports here in Southern California follow something. They follow a river, like the Santa Ana River, or they follow the PCT. So, as I mentioned, for this episode, me and my brother actually went camping in the San Bernardino Mountains to try to do a little bit of investigating. And we actually tried to get to Deep Creek, but the timing of our trip was unfortunate because we had just had the tropical storm here in Southern California, and the mountains were hit pretty hard. And so I think a lot of that Deep Creek Road was washed out, and we couldn't get in there because the road was closed. And then on top of that, we did try to go to a different location, and my car is not built to handle dirt roads like that. My little Toyota Corolla cannot make it. So in the future, when I go back up there, I'm going to have to rent a 4-wheel drive vehicle, hopefully like a 4Runner or something like that, to really get in deep. To provide additional context for the San Bernardino Mountains, it's full of wildlife. There's bears up there. There used to be grizzly bears up there, which is where Big Bear gets its name from, because of the big grizzly bears that used to live up there before they were all hunted into extinction. So we have black bear, we have mountain lions, we have mule deer, we have foxes, we have squirrels, we have skunks. We have a plethora of wildlife that lives in the San Bernardino Mountains. And in my opinion, with the absence of grizzly bears, which are large omnivores, right? Because they don't just eat meat. If Sasquatch is a large omnivore, which I think it is, it fulfills that same ecological niche, except now its primary competitor, the grizzly bear, is gone. So there's more resources for Sasquatch up there. However, me and my brother did find a spot near Big Bear that seemed very, very promising. It was deep in the woods. Unfortunately, there was people everywhere. We went on a weekend because my brother works a normal job like most people in the world. They don't get to go Bigfooting for a living. So, got my brother behind the camera here. We're gonna do a little night hike. There's a lot of people here in this area, so I don't have high hopes of activity, but the direction we're going, there aren't any people. We're gonna hike out there with no lights except for this from the camera, and yeah, do a few knocks. I'm not gonna do any calls, and hopefully we'll get something. But we also have to be careful that it's not a person responding too. But yeah, let's do it. Let's go. So you won't be able to see it, but there's an open area down here that I thought might be good. Of course, we got the plane going overhead. I'm trying to get a shot of that. Destroying my night vision. Super high hopes because a lot of people probably just heard a car.
Yeah. There's a car, there's children, there's airplanes, sirens.
Maybe. So unfortunately, nothing happened. I can't say that I'm surprised by that result. 95% of the time when you go Bigfooting, nothing happens. And I feel like those results are amplified here in Southern California. I think the spot we chose was suitable habitat for something like a Sasquatch to live in. However, I don't think it was a good spot necessarily because, one, I think there was just way too many people surrounding us. I think we would have to go on a weekday, probably in the off season when it's not camping season, and I think I'm definitely going to need a four-wheel drive vehicle to really get deep into the mountains because, as you can see from the drone shots, there is a bunch of wilderness, undeveloped wilderness right there in the mountains. I mean, that's where we were camping, was on the edge of that. To get deep in there, I'm either going to have to go backpacking or I'm going to have to get a four-wheel drive vehicle. And I'm not really one to go backpacking, so I'd rather get the four-wheel drive vehicle.
I will tell anyone willing to listen that Bigfoot is a real species here in North America of flesh and bones. That's a rare species like the wolverine that is not often seen, but I will tell anyone willing to listen with every fiber in my body, these things are out there. I've never seen one. I would love to see one, but it's not a myth, it's not folklore, even though there's very little good evidence outside of the Patterson-Gimlin film. There's tons of tracks, tons of plaster castings that these are the byproducts of an animal that's moving around, and that is evidence, and it's, although it's not the physical evidence that science demands, such as a body, that has yet to materialize. But if people were to tell me it's a waste of time, I would say, no, it's not a waste of time. This is the biggest anthropological question on the planet, bigger than anything that fossil digs in Africa will ever find out, because we're dealing with something that is not archaic and fossilized, but we're dealing with something that is real and living now as a species that most people will not take the time to become familiar with the data on the subject matter.
I think these creatures are definitely out there. I really do believe that these creatures exist here in Southern California, but they're deep in there. They're not hanging out at the edges of civilization all the time. As you can see, I do have a lot of reports from that area, but they're few and far between. We're looking at a couple of sightings per decade, and I'm sure there's more activity going on up there. The problem is, I just think they're hiding deeper in. Just like all the other animals, it's not like black bears are walking through downtown Big Bear, or mule deer are walking through downtown Big Bear. No, they're hiding deep in, where there aren't people. So, in the future, I'm definitely going to go back up there and investigate in a deeper, more secluded location, hopefully with a lot less people, and maybe I'll get something that happens. Also, when the road reopens to Deep Creek, I'll definitely go in there as well. With all that said, I think that covers it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm definitely looking forward into researching these spots more in the future. So, thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.